So for me, this was a tremendous challenge, what I ended up going through. And the good news and the reason that my experience is taken so seriously by the scientific community and medical community has to do with the medical documentation of the damage to my neocortex, which, by all of our principles of modern neuroscience, should have eliminated all but the most rudimentary forms of consciousness. And yet, the story I'm going to tell in just a minute was really one of an extraordinary expansion of my conscious awareness. So, inexplicable given the documented damage to my neocortex, which is fortunately available as a medical case report, came out in Journal of Nervous and Mental Disease in September of 2018. And that report was written by three doctors who were fascinated by my case, given the degree of my recovery, which really has no explanation in Western medicine. Messages. I mean, the most profound message that comes back from the hundreds of thousands of reports of near-death experiences through the literature and on the internet, etc., is really one of love. It's that we're all in this together. In many ways, that life review that I mentioned earlier, your life flashing before your eyes, it's almost like the golden rule is written into the fabric of the universe. Because in those life reviews, and these go back, as I said, at least 2,400 years to the writings of Plato across all cultures and belief systems. But in the life review, the interesting thing is that you experience it from the kind of emotional perspective of those impacted by your very thoughts and actions. You don't experience it as yourself, quote unquote. And that's why life reviews can be such powerful teachers. Because we have one way of looking at things from our ego perspective, and when we live our lives, but then when we get to see it in the life review and feel the power, like if we've been busy handing out pain and suffering to others, that doesn't make for a very pleasant life review. Because in this beautiful light of that God force, and the God force is not doing any judging. That is the thing most near-death experiencers agree upon. Any judgment is really there with our higher soul and our soul mates, our soul group, loved ones who have already left the physical world, who are there for part of our life review. That's where, if we've done that greedy, selfish, hurting others, pain and suffering out to others, we have to bear the brunt of it in the life review. It's a great kind of equalizer. It's a great kind of course correction. From my point of view, it's the reason that sentient culture and humanity in general has overall, the long arc of history builds towards justice and connection, because these life reviews are gently nudging us all towards this grander performance. Another piece that must be mentioned here is you cannot make sense of any of this unless you realize that reincarnation is a huge part of the package. When I came back from my journey, and believe me, when I grew up in that Methodist church in North Carolina, reincarnation was absolutely not talked about or allowed. And yet when I came back from my journey, I knew the only way to explain that infinitely healing, loving, and all-knowing God that I had encountered, as so many other NDEers have, was to know that the suffering of innocents like children and animals is only there as part of the group lesson of learning and growing. That was not their soul's one and only pass through this material realm. And I didn't know it at the time, but then my further study after my coma, when I knew reincarnation was real, I found the scientific support for reincarnation is overwhelming. If your audience goes to uvadops.org, University of Virginia Division of Perceptual Studies, scientific group, right here where I live in Charlottesville, and we're good friends with many of the scientists there. But for the last 6 decades, they have been studying, first under Dr. Ian Stevenson, now under Dr. Jim Tucker, and then there's Ed Kelly, Bruce Grace, and many others involved, scientists who are very skeptical and hardcore scientific, and what they're uncovering is all this incredible evidence of non-local consciousness. And for the reincarnation story, that involves more than 2,500 children where their past memories of past lives have actually been discerned objectively through other means. And it's such a giant database. When you start reading through it, you realize, no, this is the way all this really works. We need to
Wow.
explain it. It completely violates conventional materialist neuroscience, but that's because conventional materialist neuroscience is completely wrong and denies many of these stories. So,
well, the current science has the Western science had a materialist paradigm, which is that only what we can measure, what we can objectify, what you can duplicate, what you can falsify is reality.
Yeah.
So that's the physical aspects of everything we see and measure. But consciousness and the content of consciousness, what we feel and what we think, we cannot objectify, we cannot measure, we cannot duplicate, we cannot falsify. So it is beyond our current materialist paradigm in science. Everything from consciousness. So consciousness studies of the last 10, 50 years are changing the concept and the definition of science as well. So we need what we call a post-materialist science or an all-inclusive science, which includes subjective experiences as real as well. What we feel and think is our essence.
It is. It's at the core of all knowledge, actually.
Exactly. And there's still a lot of neuroscientists believe that you have to look in the brain to find it. And until now, they did not find it. They will never find it as well. But the problem is for most neuroscientists, the philosophers as well, psychologists sometimes as well, that they have the research money. And when you say it's not in the brain, but somewhere else, they lose the research money, they lose the position on the university. Okay. So they're frightened. And I know some professors who just tell me personally, I agree with what you tell, but officially they say it's total nonsense until they retire.
Okay.
And then they're open, and then they say, yes, it is different as I have told before.
There are many metaphors about time. The one that's made the greatest impact on me is one I first heard from the fantastic British philosopher Alan Watts. If you start listening to his lectures on YouTube, you can get addicted, I can assure you. It completely rocks one's view on life. It upends the whole collective way of treating the past, the present, and the future. And it has the potential of liberating you from the enslaving chains of history. But it takes some resetting to get into this mindset. It goes like this. The present is a ship heading forward, and we're all on board. The ship creates a wake, and we all know that a wake is the trace of a moving ship. And so, in this metaphor, the wake is the past. This means that the present creates the past, not the other way around, which we've been conditioned to believe. The past is the wake of the now moment. Think about the significance of that. What it entails is mind-blowing. We did what we did because we were supposed to end up where we are now. Now, if you think about it, we often actually don't understand why something happened until after a long while, sometimes decades or even centuries. Alan Watts said these things 40 years ago because I and millions of others were going to hear this today, probably at a point in space-time which is more ripe for people to incorporate such a radical shift in worldview. With this way of looking at these things, one fully understands the meaning of somebody being ahead of their time. Now, I took this ship metaphor a bit further. A consequence of the past being the wake of the present must, of course, be that the present is the wake of the future. This means that what is to happen already exists, which is in line with the theories of the quantum soup that everything exists in. Thus, what we do now is the result of the so-called future that we already have in some sense?
It's very much related to how much you love yourself. The more you love yourself, the more you step into a knowing that that everything is always exactly as it's supposed to be. You start to see the perfection in everything, and most importantly, you don't need anymore to be approved or to be validated by the outcome. So the more you remove your need to being understood or being validated or being approved, the more you retreat into the here and now, and the more you can appreciate joy. It's not even gratitude; it's a step further. It's a sense of appreciation. Because gratitude is still it's a little bit in the lower frequencies, because it still seems to be very polarized. While when you feel appreciation, you step in a situation where you completely line up with the symphony orchestra of life. You're perfectly, your instrument is perfectly tuned with the orchestra of life. Appreciation is the difference between me and a Jesus. Just to give an example, is just a different level of appreciation. Is as a higher level appreciation than I do.
I mean, it's one thing to hear something as a concept. I mean, it makes sense. But when you actually experience it as you're purging, not just purging mentally, but also emotionally, I felt hate. I felt rage. I felt anger. I felt resentment. I felt bitterness. I felt criticism. All these thieves of the heart, all the things that thieve us of our vitality and our life force and our power. We give it away to these things because nothing can claim our power unless we give it permission. We give it permission every single day, really unknowingly, because we don't realize how this imagery impacts us as really powerful bioenergetic beings.
And did you feel you could release these feelings at that point when you were doing this? You could actually, they were kind of leaving your body. You were feeling them, but they were at the same time leaving you. Was that the case?
Well, you know what it's like to have, we all know what it's like to have a good cry. It was like having a good cry and then a good scream and then shaking and then sadness, deep depression, anxiety, and it was like reliving all of those things, but very intensely, very potent, because they were all being released at the same time. It was like my cells were kind of exploding. It was very, very, very intense. And it was scary. It was scary. And I was alone. I was being guided, but, I was way off on my own, because you're intended to really be going through this on your own. So it was scary. And I actually had my head buried in the sand, and I didn't want to look up from the sand. And then as I started to shake and purge emotionally, mentally, then I purged physically. And then afterwards, you can only imagine, I was exhausted. And I just sat there and just was, in total awe of the experience, but I wasn't hungry. I thought, okay, you think I'd be done, but it's in layers, it's in layers. And so after that, the 40th day came, and this is a very powerful number. And one of the reasons that Gabriel Cousins recommends a 40-day fast, or that Jesus did the 40-day fast, and why this number is so powerful, is because it's a very transformative period of time where our whole body can replace everything on a cellular level as if we're a completely new being.
So the first, why I mentioned this, because the impact of the cold water was another thing that caught me by surprise. It was like, this water was frigid cold. So now I am like experiencing this, plus the fact that I cannot breathe. I went to the state of course, absolute anguish. How can I get out of this water? And that's important because it's just showing how in that desperate moment I'm fighting, I'm wanting to be out of this water. I don't know how to swim. And in just a flash, Anders, I went like that, from that state of complete horror to one of absolute peace. It's like, whoa, I didn't know what happened, but that felt great. And I always love to mention the different contrasts that this experience brought, because this tank was very dark. It was made entirely of cement. It had a roof on top. It was early, so it was dark. So the last thing I saw with my eyes open was the darkness of the space. And right there, the moment I went to that state of peace, a light came on from the bottom. And it was like the light of a candle was lit, and it was able to illuminate the whole watery surrounding. And now I'm like, oh, there's light. The other thing is I live in a house that was noisy, and right before I drowned, I could hear my heart pounding in my chest, really loud. And when I went to that moment of absolute peace, the noise was gone. There was no more
heartbeat.
sound, no more. And I was just like, oh, this feels so good. And it's when I experienced what I call the silence behind the silence. It's when you go to that space of, it's not just the lack of noise, but absolute well-being, peace, serenity, calmness. And then after that, oh my God, I crave that for the rest of my life. And I look forward, I wanted it. And later in my life, I would hide in closets, chapels, wherever it was. I wanted to go back to that silence. But okay, I am in this amazing state of well-being. And then I started to see bubbles suspended in the water. And these bubbles were surrounded by light. And wow, this is cool. I started to just chase these bubbles. And it was by chasing those bubbles that I turned myself around and I saw my body in the water.
Wow.
And when I saw the body, it was like, oh, that was incredible, because I wasn't afraid. It was the sense that I wasn't even like surprised. It was this, oh, that's me. That's my body. And it had something that I will never forget, is that the body had the eyes open.
If you like this video and other interviews and talks on Mind the Shift, please like, share, and subscribe. I appreciate all the support. Thank you.